Welcome to the Best of Beaver County, presented by St. Barnabas, a weekly segment dedicated to putting the focus on the amazing things and the amazing people behind them in Beaver County. The Best of Beaver County is sponsored by and content is provided by St. Barnabas. The show airs every Thursday from 11 to 11:30 on WBBP, WMBA, 99.3 FM, and Facebook Live. Now, with no further ado, let's welcome host Mike Romide to introduce today's program.
Good morning and welcome to the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. As a visionary leader in the healthcare industry, the St. Barnabas Health System has developed into a compassionate and quality care provider since 1900. Now with campuses located in Allegheny, Beaver, and Butler counties, care services are offered to our retirement communities, those in living assistance and skilled nursing residents. Additionally, the St. Barnabas Medical Center has world-class doctors and dentistry teams where patients can receive a full range of services under one roof, from comprehensive rehabilitation to home care and hospice care. As a trusted name in healthcare, St. Barnabas remains focused on the health and well-being of the patients and residents by offering healthy living solutions that enhance the qualities of their daily lives. Building upon its heritage, St. Barnabas continues to reach out to those in need and lives out its mission through individual and institutional services which help the health, education, and social needs of others. Men and women are invited to join St. Barnabas in the work of Christian caring, healing, and teaching as we, along with St. Barnabas, bear witness to its founder's reminder, God is able. Now, March 29th was a very important day in our history. It is Vietnam Veterans Day. And on this day, yesterday actually, U.S. troops were withdrawn from Vietnam, officially marking the end of the Vietnam War. Here to talk with us is Sean Hall. Sean is the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club and host of VBC, the Veterans Breakfast Club's podcast, The Scuttlebutt and Vietnam Era Veterans. Good morning, Sean, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much again for having me, Mike. I think this is my third or fourth time on the program, and it's always a pleasure.
Well, it's always interesting to talk with you because the Veterans Breakfast Club continues to grow with the numbers of Vietnam-era veterans in our listening audience and throughout the Beaver County area. And of course, as I mentioned, March 29th has taken on a new meaning, especially for the Vietnam veterans. And it allows us and them a time to reflect and remember. The VBC and the Scuttlebutt podcast has held a nationwide day-long commemoration event to talk about veterans issues. Could you tell us how it got started and tell us what happened yesterday?
Yeah, I believe Vietnam Veterans Day was instituted by Congress and signed into law, I think, by Obama, several years ago. It means a lot for us to be able to honor that day with all of the veterans that are a part of BBC and all the veterans across the country that we've been able to connect with since going nationwide at the start of the pandemic. Yesterday we held a fantastic event at the Heinz History Center. Last night we were there with I'd say over 350 Vietnam veterans. And 550 people registered for the event. People viewed it online. We had a color guard, sang the national anthem. We read the names of every Vietnam veteran that was registered for the event, both online and in person. They were able to come up and be pinned and just gain recognition for their service and their sacrifice. And it couldn't have been a better event. I was brought to tears during it as you just watch something that is historic. Almost every year you sit down and you get to see this happen, and you get to see them really take in that they're welcomed home here, and that was something that was sorely lacking back in their time.
Certainly was, and one of the reasons for the commemoration on March 29th is that the Vietnam War officially ended on that day, but there were still veterans behind cleaning up, working with the South Vietnamese, trying to pull everything together before total withdrawal. And one of the reasons why we have this day is because back in the early 1970s, when the vets were being brought home, there wasn't a welcome home parade. nationwide or even in smaller communities. They just kind of came home on commercial airlines and went about their business as if it was the day after they left for the service. Yeah,
it's sad to hear that a lot of the veterans got home and immediately changed out of their fatigues because they didn't want to be associated with it. It's a far cry from where we are today in welcoming home our servicemen and women, and the Vietnam veterans are key in not giving up on current generation. They are the reason that benefits exist for our current generation of servicemen and women, and they are to be commended for that.
Mm-hmm. And we commend you for continuing to bring the issue and the plight of Vietnam veterans to our attention through the Veterans Breakfast Club and your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is a labor of love. I'm so fortunate to work with the Veterans Breakfast Club and produce this podcast called The Scuttlebutt, and the tagline is Understanding Military Culture. I'm a civilian. I'm not a veteran. I just have a passion for veteran stories, and I'm intrigued by military history and all things sort of military topics. It's such a different culture than what I'm used to as a civilian, and I have no lack of topics that I can talk about on the podcast, guests that I can bring on that can help me to understand military culture from all eras, all branches, everything involved with it. If you can find the Scuttlebutt across podcast platforms to listen to through audio, or you can jump on YouTube and just look up the Scuttlebutt and watch every episode that we have. Recently, I just had on Frederick Marks, who maybe some of your listeners remember as the director of Hoop Dreams back in I believe it was the 90s. He recently has completed a 5-part documentary series, and I had him on the podcast to talk about this documentary series called Veterans Journey Home. Very good. And once again, give us the podcast address where people can find it. Yeah, you could go right onto the VBC website, which is www.veteransbreakfastclub.org/Scuttlebutt, or just go to our homepage and you'll see at the top podcast. Click on that and you'll find my program. All right, Sean, thank you for spending the time with us again. We appreciate it and all you do for the veterans. Always a pleasure. I'm excited to sit and listen to all of the veterans as part of our network share today. So thank you so much for having me on again. Thank you, Sean. It's an exciting and a special day. Joining us in studio this morning is Lieutenant Colonel Ben Wright, U.S. Air Force retired. Ben, good morning, and thank you for coming in.
Well, good morning, Mike. I'm delighted to be here as well.
Ben comes to us in Beaver County by way of Texas, you were telling me. You're a Texan, but you've been in Beaver County and Beaver for the past 13 years.
Yeah, I've lived in Beaver Borough for 13 years. I was here 91 to 94. I was living in Ambridge. Mm-hmm. Then I was out in the West for 16 years and back again in 2010.
You established a church?
Well, I worked with small churches that aren't able to afford a full-time pastor. And right now I'm working with 2, one in Carnegie and one in Steubenville, Ohio.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's take you back to 1969, was it? 1967, you first joined the Air Force?
Well, actually went in 1969.
Okay.
Graduated from college, was working on a master's degree, wound up doing a delayed enlistment to go in the Air Force after the semester I was in was over. But of course the draft was going then, and I was talking to the clerk at the draft board when my draft orders were going to appear. So if I'd answered the draft orders at that point in time, 98% probability I'd gone the infantry, either in the Army or the Marines. And I decided if I'm going to do this, I think I'd rather fly airplanes. So I volunteered to go to the Air Force and volunteered to go to pilot training.
Yeah, those were pretty pressure, tense field times for young American men at the time.
Yes, sir.
I looked at some of the pictures today, and I've seen some from yesterday at different places, and I'm thinking, geez, these guys, this doesn't look like a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids that when they went into the military, they were fresh-faced and young, and we don't realize it's 50 years ago and how time has passed. But I want to know if in the eyes and the hearts, in the deep souls of individuals who fought in Vietnam and served in Vietnam, do they still envision themselves as those young 18 and 19-year-old kids?
Well, the picture of then is, but under the perspective of now. And of course, some carry wonderful memories of their time in service, others not so. That's been a lot of my interest in being a volunteer with the Veterans Breakfast Club is I'm very interested in the healing aspect of it, as well as because it's healthy for people to share their stories.
Yeah. And so, and listening to the stories, how does it impact you as an Air Force, a member of the Air Force at the time? You're flying over missions over Vietnam, correct?
Yes, sir. I actually was in Vietnam much later. Actually, the peace accords were signed in '73. And went to Clark Air Base in the Philippines, flying C-130s in '74. And at that time, we were still full up flying around the air bases in Thailand, so I spent a lot of time in Thailand. And then early in 1975, the North Vietnamese Army started very rapidly moving south, and it became obvious very quickly that South Vietnam was going to fall. And so we did a few airlift missions to get things out of South Vietnam we didn't want the North Vietnamese to have.
Yeah.
And then just before Saigon fell in April of '75, we had a few days of a maximum effort airlift of refugees, primarily people who had worked with the U.S. military or the U.S. Embassy.
Yeah, is that some of the footage that we've seen over the course of the last 50 years in time? Is the helicopters, planes trying to get those people out of there, and they're just getting burdened down?
Yeah, I was actually, flying fixed wing. I last flew in and out of Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon on 28 April 1975, which was the last day for fixed wing. That night they closed the runway down with mortars and artillery, and then the 29th, everybody got out either by rotary wing or boat.
And as we know from history, the course of time, how it dragged out, and even after the peace accords were signed, the North Vietnamese violated that treaty and continued to move on the South Vietnamese.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Tragic times. What do you think about it today, and what are you hearing from these folks today when we talk about the 29th and a special Vietnam Veterans Day? Is there a feeling of appreciation now?
I think there is an appreciation because so many people had a bad reception coming home with negative responses to them. And Vietnam War Veterans Day was established to recognize that Vietnam veterans need to be welcomed like everyone else.
It's interesting because, over the course of time, we've talked about the hippies and, the protests and the draft card burnings and things like that. But the Vietnam veterans also had a difficult time going to veterans clubs, VFWs and the like. Yeah,
initially they were some rejections from some of the veterans organizations. And then as they continued to age out, they realized they had to open up to the Vietnam veterans. Even the Korean veterans had some pushback. And of course now it's the Vietnam veterans that are saying, well, the Vietnam organizations, what do we do now when we're all gone, which is not all that far in the future.
And what do you think we've learned as a nation since that time?
Well, my hope is that we learn that if we're going to engage people in military force, we only do that if it's absolutely necessary. And that it is a military solution rather than being a political or diplomatic solution. And if we do enter for a military solution, then it has to be to prevail and win and move on from it.
All right. We're talking with Ben Wright. Ben is U.S. Air Force retired. Joining us now on the phone is Army Vietnam veteran, Edward Blank, who entered the service in 1965. Mr. Blank, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Please call me Ed.
Okay, Ed, thank you for coming on with us this morning. I don't know if you know Ben Wright, but let me introduce you to Ed Wright.
Oh, boy, I do know him, and great respect for him.
Okay. So have you met at the Veterans Breakfast Clubs?
Yes, we've done a lot of Veterans Breakfast Club things and some other social things together as well.
Okay. Ed, what was it like in 1965 as a young kid? You were in the Army. Infantry, I'm assuming?
No, I was Army Signal.
Okay. And that means?
Well, when we got to Vietnam, we put up telephone poles where possible in areas that had been cleared and strung cable on them. Where we could not put up poles, we dug trenches about 6 feet deep, and in the process disinterred countless thousands of scorpions and red ants.
Something that I guess they didn't prepare you for that in boot camp.
No, they didn't.
And how did that assist in our role in Vietnam to keep the South Vietnamese from falling to communism? How did those telephone wires that you talk about, how did that assist?
Well, we were simply establishing opportunities for communication among units, and it was a never-ending process. I'd be out 2 or 3 weeks on each job, and then come back for a day or two and go out on the next job. I think it may be, you mentioned boot camp. I was ROTC at Duquesne University, so I was commissioned as an officer and spent about 8 months in Fort Gordon, Georgia, as a company commander, and then got the shoe that I was waiting to drop did, and I transferred to Fort Lee, Louisiana, to join the unit that I would be going to Vietnam with. We trained for about 4 months before we left, took a train from Louisiana to San Francisco, boarded a ship, took 18 days to get to Quy Nhon in Vietnam, and I was there for the first 6 months. So what I did not anticipate is that someone determined that they did not want the entire 40th Signal Battalion to be discharged or be sent home at the same time. So exactly 50% of us had to go to other units halfway through our year. And I was transferred to the 267th Signal Battalion and did exactly the same kind of job, but with a battalion I had not trained with. But it was essentially we're all doing the same work, so I just didn't know almost everyone in the company by name.
And in terms of what we've learned over the last 50 years and your experiences with the Veterans Breakfast Club, the experiences that you hear from the other veterans, are we in a better place today?
I think the world is upside down today in many, many respects. Nothing is as good as it was, as far as I'm concerned, in the 20th century. We have truly gone haywire in so many ways. Now, Vietnam veterans had a special circumstance in that many came back to a hostile environment because there was so much anti-Vietnam rhetoric at the time. I did not confront any of that. I did not come back on some kind of a troop plane with a publicized arrival at the airport or anything like that. I flew from Saigon to Fairbanks, Alaska for a brief layover. We're talking about an hour or so, and then flew directly to Fort Dix, New Jersey for discharge. And so I was just on my own there. And in fact, I decided, given that I was in North New Jersey at the time, I decided simply to go to New York and catch up on Broadway and films for 10 or 12 days before I came home.
Well, very good. Well, Mr. Ed Blank, thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences with us, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much, sir.
Edward Blank, Army veteran, Vietnam veteran, entered the service in 1965. We'll continue our conversation with Ben Wright. You're going to stick around with us, right, Ben?
Yes, sir.
As we continue our conversation and honor the Vietnam veterans. Yesterday was Vietnam Veterans Day in the United States. We'll continue on the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network.
It's been stated before that working at St. Barnabas is compassionate work with excellent career opportunities. In addition, we've heard when you enjoy what you're doing every day, it's not work. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen in to what motivates their employees.
Hello, my name is Emily Tahansky, and I love to be able to help others and knowing that I make a difference in a person's life.
Find out about the exceptional career opportunities St. Barnabas has to offer by visiting stbarnabashealthsystem.com/careers for more information, or by calling 724-444-JOBS. That's 724-444-5627. Find out why St. Barnabas is apart from the ordinary.
When you think about retirement, what images come to mind? Why not let yourself imagine enjoying an exceptional retirement lifestyle at the Village at St. Barnabas in Gibsonia? Attainable luxury can become yours because the Village has no large upfront fees and it's based on a simple annual no-risk contract. The only decision to make is when to move in. Call 724-443-0700 or click stbarnabashealthsystem.com.
All right.
It's the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. Our military veteran men and women have fought to protect us, and St. Barnabas is now privileged to maintain their quality of life as we continue to offer quality and compassionate care services that make St. Barnabas apart from the ordinary. We are speaking with Ben Wright in studio. Ben is a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Air Force, retired, and we're sharing memories with him. We do this show today because yesterday was what is considered in the United States, it is the Vietnam Veterans Day, and veterans all across the nation from the Vietnam era are getting our salutes, and we're honoring them today. And joining us now on the phone is Rick Weber. Rick, thank you for joining with us today. You tell us a little bit about yourself and about your military service. You were drafted.
Well, before I do that, Mike, thank you for allowing us to have the opportunity to be heard. Thank you to your audience for remembering Vietnam veterans. Give you a quick background. I was drafted into the military. I was a first lieutenant in Vietnam. Spent 15 months, 8 months with the 25th Infantry Division. 7 months with 101st Airborne. Spent time in the South as well as not North Vietnam, but the northern area of Vietnam. So that gives you a little background. Had a number of opportunities, number of jobs while I was there.
Okay.
So
now,
I'll let you take over from there.
When you say the northern area of Vietnam, does that mean you were in Cambodia or flying over Cambodia?
Yeah, well, actually, I was in Cambodia with the 25th. I was fortunate enough in March of 1970, excuse me. Actually was with the 2nd Platoon in the 25th Infantry Division to invade, and I say invade, Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
We never asked for permission, we just went.
Yeah.
It was a three-pronged operation. There were probably 50,000 troops that invaded Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And the only way you found out about it was eventually the press found out and actually came over. It was, up until that point, no one was aware of it in the United States.
Yeah, I believe Nixon was the president at the time. And
that is correct. He kept it quiet till the press started breaking it.
Yeah.
That is correct.
And what do you think that accomplished going into Cambodia? I know we learned through history and how we got there and those sort of things, but historically speaking, there were a lot of things going on in Washington from Kennedy to Johnson to Nixon that we weren't aware of, and I don't know if the troops were aware of what was happening either.
Oh, absolutely not. Not to correct you, but it actually started with Eisenhower.
Sure.
Laos was Eisenhower's biggest concern at the time when he was president. To answer your question, had we done it correctly, had the military been allowed to do what they needed to do, I believe that could have stopped the war. To do it, we would have to invade from both sides, blocking force, because what happened was the North Vietnam regulars just kept pulling back. When we finally pulled out of Cambodia, we were already 24 miles into Cambodia. They just kept falling back because we just kept pushing them back. But when I say pushing them back, they were just falling back because they knew that eventually we would run out of gas as far as the military operation, and that's exactly what happened. Within 24 hours of it breaking, we left Cambodia. Mm-hmm. So the only thing we accomplished in Cambodia was we captured hundreds and hundreds of tons of ammunition and supplies. That's all we captured. That's all we did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, had it been done correctly, if it had been World War II commanders doing it, they would have sent a blocking force and they would have captured them or killed them in Cambodia. But they didn't want that. So,
Ben Wright is in studio. Ben, you have something to say? Did you have a comment?
No, I found out even being in the military about the Cambodia invasion because of President Nixon's speech on TV, a very famous thing, and that was where I learned about the invasion of Cambodia.
Yeah, one of the things that we learned over the course of time, again, Lieutenant, our Secretary of Defense McNamara comes out later on and says, well, we kind of knew in the mid-'60s, that would have been right in when you were in the service, Mr. Weber, that, yeah, we kind of knew that we weren't going anywhere with it, but 58,000 Americans died, and there were over 2 million Vietnamese fighters that died. So if they were talking body counts at the time, you were winning the war.
Well, that's basically correct. And I would stand on this. If you look at all the battles, the major battles, the United States military never lost a battle in Vietnam. Yes, Saigon was captured because they were sleeping at the switch, but that was recaptured. All of the people that invaded South Vietnam were actually killed or captured.
Yes.
The United States did not lose a single battle. Where we lost the war was it the military. The military didn't lose the war. It was actually the leaders of the military as well as the civilian people running the war.
Okay.
And, of course, the press didn't help.
Sure.
And I'm not knocking the press because I will say this. At the time I was drafted, I was a college graduate. I was already had flunked 2 physicals, and I was on my way to law school. And unfortunately, Ted hit in January of 1968, and that changed the whole scenario.
Mm-hmm. Sir?
I went to basic training at Fort Dix, AIT at Fort Dix, went to a friend of mine who I went in the Army with on Friday the 13th, talked me into going to OCS with him. And so long story short, our OCS class was 2369. We were the oldest OCS class ever to graduate because we had people in their 30s graduating with kids.
Wow.
We had 14 people with master's and or doctor's degrees. We had 7 practicing attorneys. So when we graduated, our average age was 27 years old. So they were all drafted.
All right. Rick Weber, thank you for your service. So we salute you, and thank you for joining us on the program today.
My pleasure, and I thank you and your audience for remembering Vietnam veterans.
It's our pleasure, our honor.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My honor.
Thank you, sir. Ben Wright is still with us, and we have Chad Riddle on the phone with us. Chad, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on with us. Okay, we're still getting Chad on the phone. So in terms, Ben, of what Mr. Weber was talking about, there's quite a history involved with it, and I'm sure at the Scuttlebutt and at these Vietnam breakfasts, these are some of the topics that get discussed on a regular basis.
Well, we're essentially apolitical.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So we try not to get into the politics either currently or that much in the past, but we're more concerned with our personal experience and what we did.
Still dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, there's a lot of people who are, and we've become a whole lot more enlightened about it. And so, both from pastoral care on the spiritual end of it, psychiatric care, medical care, we've become much better about addressing the issues with post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm. As a civilian, I thought it was criminal what the administrations over the course of time had done to the veterans through the draft and otherwise to continue it going. And even as you see later on in life, so many of the problems that the veterans have had, whether it's PTSD or Agent Orange or so many other things that sort of over the past 20, 25 years have been just pushed aside and weren't cared about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you guys for doing this and being here. Chad Riddle is with us now. Chad, welcome to the Best of Beaver County.
Hi there. Good morning.
Thank you for being with us. I understand that you were attending St. Vincent College in 1971 when you were drafted.
Not quite. I graduated in 70.
In 70, okay.
Yes.
All right.
And right after we got out of school, I had the draft creeping up on me rather quickly. And 3 days before I got my notice, I signed up in the Navy in the officer candidate program. For me, it was a good move.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing that that was the avenue of choice for a lot of young men at the time. If you knew the draft was coming and you knew you picked a low number, that it would be best for you to either join officers training or to enlist in another branch of the service.
Yes, it did. My draft number was 54, and I happened to run into a recruiter out in the community, and it all worked out.
Mm-hmm. So tell us just a little bit about your life in the past 50 years and how you feel about it all today.
Well, officer school in Newport, it was pretty much weather that we had around here, rainy, foggy, a little bit of snow and ice. Afterwards, as a junior officer on a submarine rescue ship, I had a chance to do just about everything except executive officer and commanding officer. And we were a submarine rescue ship. We were out a lot servicing submarines. And probably the most interesting part was when we were off of Sicily working with a Italian submarine and the submarine rescue ship. I got a chance to go on the submarine and come out through the rescue chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. In fact, I found out later that submarine was famous for its activities in World War II. And if anybody's interested, go Google the USS Barb, B-A-R-B.
Okay.
And for what I learned about it, when I got out, I was out of the Navy 4 years later. I was interviewing, and the two guys in one company, they asked me how did I like the Navy, and I still feel this way. It was $1 million experience. I'm glad I did it, but now it was somebody else's turn.
Yeah. Okay. Very good, Chad Riddle. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story with us. And we salute you as a Vietnam veteran. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you. And is that kind of wrapping things up here this morning? Okay, very good. Once again, our guest in studio has been Lieutenant Colonel Ben Wright, U.S. Air Force retired. Ben, thank you for sharing the experiences and helping us along here this morning on the program. And if there are Vietnam veterans out there who aren't a part of the Vietnam or the Veterans Breakfast Club or the podcast or anything like that, would you encourage them to?
Oh, absolutely. We're always trying to get more people to come hear veteran stories and share theirs, and not just veterans, but non-veterans as well.
And it helps, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Psychologically,
Absolutely.
It helps to get that stuff out and to hear others who may have similar experiences that you do.
It does.
And also
Absolutely.
the information that you talked about where it actually helps veterans because there are more avenues of help out there, and not only psychologically but medically as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ben, for being with us. We
Thank
salute
you, sir.
as well. Thank you for being with us on the Best of Beaver County radio show. I'm Mike Roma. Yesterday was Vietnam Veterans Day in the United States, where we honor those who fought in Vietnam. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Best of Beaver County. St. Barnabas is pleased to have provided content and sponsorship for the program. Tune in this Sunday at 11:30 for an encore presentation of today's program on Beaver County Radio. And next Thursday at 11 for another edition of the Best of Beaver County on WBVP, WMBA, and 99.3 FM.